Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode 8 of Tigray Forum. My name is Elizabeth Hihdoko Gabrasilase, and I will be the moderator for today's panel discussion. On this episode, we will explore and address the controversies surrounding the joint United Nations and Ethiopian Human Rights Commission's investigation into the crimes committed in Tigray during the war. We are joined by Dr. Patrick White, who holds a PhD in political science and has written extensively on the peace process in the Horn of Africa. Gabra Christos Gabrasilase, the man behind Tighat, which documents and analyzes the Tigray War. We are also joined by Tigray Gabra Mikhael, whose recent article on the dynamics of the investigation sparked this conversation on Tigray Forum. Welcome. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me here on this show.
Thank you.
Thanks. A pleasure to join this panel discussion. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to echo everyone else's sentiments. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. So in March this year, the United Nations Commission for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, announced the joint inquiry intending to investigate alleged violations of human rights, humanitarian and refugee law committed in Tigray. Between the 16th May and 20 August, the joint investigation conducted the work in some parts of Tigray, including Mekelle, Gondar, and in Addis Ababa. It was not able to access all areas in Tigray, and here I quote directly from the UN statement, due to the rapidly evolving security concerns and other difficulties. And of course, the other difficulties are not disclosed currently. On the 13th of September, Michelle Bachelet provided an update to the Human Rights Council. In her update, she confirmed that it was already clear that cases documented comprise multiple allegations of human rights violations. The involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has raised serious concerns about the objectivity and impartiality of the Commission. Compounded not least by the Commission's failure to investigate in all areas of Tigray where human rights abuses have been alleged. Ahead of the final report on the 1st of November, we will reflect here tonight on the nature of this commission, the controversy surrounding its work, and what we might expect from the final publication of the findings. So my first question is for you, Patrick. In relation to investigations of this kind, a question that often arises is, whose jurisdiction is it to investigate crimes allegedly committed in a given country? The Ethiopian government, for instance, appears to argue that a unilateral investigation by a foreign body, for example, the UN, would be a breach of Ethiopia's sovereignty. And that seems to be why the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission had to partner with the UN to conduct the investigation in Tigray. So from that perspective, Patrick, do you think it would have been possible to get around the sovereignty argument by the Ethiopian government?
Well, I mean, I guess there's two parts to that question in terms of my answer, in terms of like the legal question, and then the more practical on the ground issues of conducting the investigation. In terms of like legal requirements, the UN has the right to conduct investigations into serious international crimes, and it doesn't have any obligation legally to include a government of a sovereign state in that investigation. But the biggest reason why you've likely seen the UN and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission teaming up is just for more practical on the ground reasons. Because if the government chooses to block the commission from being able to access certain areas, it would be able to do that in practical terms. So it would make investigating very difficult. But then we have to question the extent to which the two organizations teaming up compromises the investigation. For months, the Ethiopian government rejected any form of independent inquiry, and the argument was on the basis of state sovereignty. It was only after the Amnesty International's report on the Aksum massacre was released in February that it began to back away from its initial position, and it called for a joint investigation. So one has to wonder why the Ethiopian government is insisting on being a part of this investigation if it's supposed to be independent and autonomous. Some would argue that this is tantamount to allowing a murder suspect to be part of the jury on their murder trial in many ways. So again, the UN has the authority to conduct an investigation on its own, but it would be very difficult if the Ethiopian government were to continue blocking it. In many respects, though, the argument is that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is not impartial or autonomous, and we're going to get into those reasons today. Primarily, it has to do with the fact that the funding for the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission comes from the Ethiopian government, and its members are either appointed by the state or by the Ethiopian House of Representatives. So this creates a number of concerns about the independence of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. And I would argue that also there's some questions about the UN's independence, which were revealed by the internal meetings that were leaked, where essentially the UN members were saying that they would need to notify the Ethiopian government of any reports of human rights violations, and it would have to run it by the Ethiopian government first before releasing them. So I would argue that there's questions about the impartiality and independence of both institutions.
Thank you, Patrick. So you raised a very important points, the legality aspect and the practicality aspect. So because in the past 11 months, we have seen how much difficulties the humanitarian organizations and other organizations have been facing to get into Tigray. So it makes sense in a way, the practicality aspect, the practical aspect. Taglay, my next question is for you, taking into account what Patrick has said about the investigations of who should investigate this kind of crimes. Can you talk about why you think or why you believe the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission should not be involved in conducting the investigation in Tigray? You explicitly have been saying that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission should not be involved in this process. But the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is, in a way, a very established organization in the Horn of Africa. Recently, the head of the Human Rights Commission has been awarded some kind of award from Germany. So can you explain a bit why you think, why you believe strongly that it should not be involved?
Thanks, Elsa. So to my mind, I think that the purpose of any investigation in such matters is to get into the bottom of things, to find out what happened, and to let the world and any interested party know what transpired in those areas. That is the main purpose. That is the main objective of conducting investigation in Tigray today. And once we make that assumption, I think that the next natural question that anybody should ask is, does the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission have the ability first and the credibility to do such kind of investigation? Do they have the credibility to go into Tigray, to be impartial, like Patrick alluded to, and to find out things? That is the basic question that anybody should ask. And if you ask that question, the answer that you come up with is a resounding no. So I have written two kind of pieces arguing why the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, and especially the person who is in charge of the commission, shouldn't be entrusted with such kind of task. The first argument that should have counted against the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and against Daniel Bekele would be Daniel Bekele's background, right? So there is one thing that makes the people who have been appointed by Abiy into very important positions, that makes them common, that makes them kind of they have the common denominator. You could mention Daniel Bekele, you could mention Burtukan Medeksa, the head of the election board. You could mention the head of the media authority. You could mention the regulator of the media. All the people who have been appointed, they had a position which was on balance against the TPLF before they assumed power. So they have an interest in for instance, the TPLF being found guilty, right? They are more or less on the government side by design from the beginning. So there is that first thing, that his background is against the TPLF, and therefore he wouldn't be an impartial investigator on matters that involve the TPLF. And the second reason is, even if we didn't take this into account, after he had assumed the position, he had made his position public about the war. So for instance, I think it was in January or in February when he appeared on TV and said that he was relieved to learn that the war in Tigray hadn't caused as much damage as he had feared, right? So to him, what had happened in Aksum, what had happened in many areas in Tigray wasn't something to be worried about. He said that there was some collateral damage here and there, but it wasn't nothing to cry about. It wasn't nothing to be horrified about. He had made his position clear, and you wouldn't expect such a person to conduct an investigation and come up with a result that would negate the position that he had taken, right? That one would have to be a fool to kind of say that, well, I was a fool, I was an idiot to say that. The results indicate actually that very heinous and very egregious crimes had been committed. So even if we had assumed, and this is a very hypothetical assumption, even if we assume that Daniel Bekele isn't against the TPLF, doesn't have any interest in what the truth is, even if we were to make that assumption, the fact that he had taken a position disqualified him from being an impartial investigator. So he wouldn't have the credibility and the impartiality to do that. The other, I think, more fundamental reason why the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission shouldn't be involved in investigation is something to do with all Ethiopian institutions in Ethiopia today, in Addis Ababa today. All institutions have been kind of commandeered, have been co-opted to be used by the Abiy regime. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, the election board, the telecommunications, the Ethiopian Airlines, they have all been used in one way or another to attack the Tigrayans. And like Patrick said earlier, you can't then ask this kind of organization to then go and investigate and expect it to tell the truth into what happened. So that would be like Patrick put it, asking a murderer to sit in court, to be the judge and to pass a verdict. You'd expect what such a person would say. And the other point that should have automatically disqualified them is, so it's been 1 year now, the war in Tigray, right? And the only investigation that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has done on its own volition is one, the Maikarta massacre, and everybody knows why they did that, right? It was a contrived investigation, and the result was that the forces aligned with the TPLF had committed egregious crimes. That's what they said a couple of hours after the alleged atrocity. And the reason they did that was because they wanted to give the government some weapon to be used against the Tigrayans. After they did that, they kept absolutely silent. For the Aksum massacre, they didn't say anything until the Amnesty International went and broke the news and shocked the international community. They didn't say anything into the other countless atrocities that have been committed in Tigray. But when there is even a minor infraction in other areas outside Tigray, for instance, in the Amhara region, with the speed of light, they issue a statement. So that is an absolute sign that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is biased in favor of certain political views and certain ethnicities, and biased against what happens in Tigray. And his ethnicity, as unfortunate as this is, the ethnicity of people in Ethiopia today, it matters a lot, because there is a feeling in Tigray that a certain ethnic group, a political view which has traction in a certain group, is being used against the Tigrayans. And there is no way that any Tigrayan now would trust any investigation done by any Ethiopian of a specific ethnic group. So that should have counted against him. That should have set a red flag. And when you put everything together, what you get is a person and an institution that can't really be trusted by Tigrayans, that doesn't have any credibility by Tigrayans. And if the purpose of an investigation is to get the bottom of things and come up with results that would be accepted by the victims, then the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission wouldn't be that institution. And for those reasons, I strongly argue that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission shouldn't get anywhere near into conducting investigation in Tigray.
Thank you, Tigray. You explained it very well from the victim's perspective, or from the Tigray story perspective, because you have been, I assume, following the stories closely, reporting and writing about it. And also you provided a very wide aspect of how the government of Ethiopia is working, and how different institutions are working in alignment with the government. It's quite a good background, I assume. Thank you. Deborah Christos, you can add to what Tigray and Patrick have said, but I want you to tell us about Tigray specifically, because Tigray has been documenting crimes since the beginning of the war in November 2020. And Tigray has been also providing analysis of the war in a way that help us understand what's happening in the face of total communication blackout. As far as you are able, you fact check the information you collect, the information you receive. In light of the investigation's effort to uncover truths, can you talk a little bit about how you go about collecting information and putting it together to map the atrocities as you have over the past months, as Tigray has been doing over the past months?
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. I don't think there's much I'd like to add to what Patrick and Tigray have excellently explained. I just wanted to say the institution that Daniel Bekele leads, and he himself, are the most sophisticated. It is the most sophisticated partner in the war in Tigray, in the sense that it actually have developed a very clever way of, deceiving international organizations and observers, to the extent that some of them really argue that it is an independent institution, and that is developed by a couple of strategies. One, like Tigray said, you jump at the opportunity to portray Tigrayan forces as an evil, like what they did in Maikadra. But in other areas, you keep quiet. But when there is an investigation like what has been done by the Amnesty International, then you come up also, with a part of the truth, basically portraying yourself as, well, you see, we also accept the truth. And so that kind of like makes some people believe, well, I think this institution is, despite the struggle, is doing something, is kind of independent. So really by commission, omission, downplaying, and, ignoring, this institution plays, I would say, really the most important thing, because it kind of like really is believed by some organizations. So I see it as a very, as one very dangerous institution. And the Daniel Bekele also like relies on his contacts that he developed, that he built when he was opposing the TPLF EPRDF rule. And those organizations worked for many organizations that are very much known, like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and up to the war in Tigray, that something terrible was going to happen. But we knew that with the communications blackout, with the electricity, shutting down of electricity, we knew what they were trying to do. They were trying to hide the cry, the pain, that nobody should hear about the pain of the people. And with the blockade. So we were just like worried about that. And we decided, well, we have to do something. We have to capture as much as possible, the truth in Tigray. And that is how we started. So really, it is very important for us at Tigray to get to the bottom of whatever event or whatever atrocity we are trying to cover. So usually what we do is we get information from some people, but you'd be surprised, Elizabeth, that we don't publish a lot of articles that are a lot of information that comes to us, because we couldn't really find, we couldn't verify, we couldn't find, we couldn't verify it using other sources. So it's really one of the most important things is when we get information first, we ask for contacts, we ask people, we call them. We spend really most of our time calling people, talking to them. And then that's not enough. What we do is we try to find other sources through other means, not through recommendations by the people that gave us the information or the first contacts, but through other means. And once we believe, we have independently verified the information from different sources, then we go to a next level where we really like piece the information together for an article, and after that we have it checked, by at least one or two editors, and then we publish it. Because what we really believe at Tigray is, the truth is what endures. Truth is what really, it's not like a temporary noise or something, but we believe we are documenting a part of the Tigrayan story, a part of the Tigrayan history, and that its truth is very important, that we want it to last, for a long time as a truth. And so that is a little bit how we verify information, how we get information. Unfortunately now, as you know, with the total communication blackout, we are not publishing a lot, and that has to do because our contacts in Tigray are not able to send us information, and we are not able to contact them. We're very limited contact now, and that has impacted our work. But I hope that gives you a little bit of a picture in how we verify the information that we publish at Tigray.
Thank you, Gabra Christos. It does give quite a good understanding how Tighat works and how you collect the information, but at the same time, it also gives quite clear understanding the challenges you face at Tighat. So thank you. So Patrick, you also spoke a little bit, but also from listening from Taklai and Gabra Christos analysis of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, it does sound there is this kind of sophisticated game going on from the Ethiopian government side. My question for you now is, what do you make of the UN settling for a joint investigation with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission? And eventually, if there is an agreement that the joint investigation is, if it cannot be impartial, what are the next steps? What can we expect? Is it another investigation? And what kind of organizations, for example, would it be the AU Commission? Can you explain or explore those ideas?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, I think we've made pretty clear that the idea of a joint commission is problematic on a number of different levels. Talking about like what next in terms of different organizations, I mean, the AU announced in May that it would be launching a commission of inquiry, which began its work in June and it would go on for a period of 3 months. Importantly, the AU rejected the idea that the Ethiopian government has to be a part of the commission. So essentially, the argument was that the AU would be altering and diluting its independence if it allowed the Ethiopian government to join into the AU Commission of Inquiry. So it stood strong on that. But in response to that, the Ethiopian government issued a number of statements. So I'm just going to read a couple of them that I put down here. So Ethiopia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that it's regrettable to note that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights made a unilateral announcement on the establishment of the Commission of Inquiry. And it said that such an inquiry would be completely outside of the scope of the invitation by the government and lacks legal basis. So the Ethiopian government requested or demanded that the AU immediately cease this new Commission of Inquiry. And an Ethiopian Foreign Affairs Ministry statement criticized the independent inquiry as being misguided and lacking legal basis, and proposed a joint probe instead. But again, like we said, there is no legal basis for the Ethiopian government to demand to be a part of these commissions. This is something that it's doing in an effort to make its narrative sort of dominate the discussion. It seems obvious to me. The AU has, under the provisions of the AU's Article 45 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, it has the right to speak with victims, alleged villains, and other witnesses, as well as to collect documents from relevant authorities. So it has the ability to conduct this investigation without the Ethiopian government's say-so. But again, like I said before, the problem then becomes one of practicality, because if the Ethiopian government is refusing to allow them into the country or into Tigray specifically, or certain regions in Tigray, it becomes very difficult for them to conduct a thorough investigation. And it was mentioned in the stories that then if that was the case, then they would rely on sort of the willingness of neighboring countries to then allow them to conduct investigations. But when we're talking neighboring countries, we're talking Sudan and Eritrea. And obviously, Eritrea is as much or more implicated in the abuses that have been committed in Tigray since November 2020 as the Ethiopian government and as Amhara forces. So the idea of the Eritrean government cooperating with the AU or allowing it to, enter Eritrean territory, I think it's not going to happen. With Sudan, I mean, there is some investigations that can be conducted with the acquiescence of Sudan. We have refugees who fled from places like Maikadra, who helped to complicate the initial narrative that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission put out with regards to the Maikadra story. So the initial report was that it was in whole committed by Samri, a Tigrayan militia. But then the reports that came out later, when we were able to talk to Tigrayan refugees in Sudan, complicated the narrative, and it became very clear that that at the very least, you know, the two sides were implicated in the abuses that took place. But there's only so much that can be done by relying on neighboring countries. So as much as I would say that the AU's investigation is better because it's independent of the Ethiopian government, now it's going to run into logistical issues. The one thing I would end with in terms of my past experience researching the Horn. So I did a lot of research on the South Sudan peace process. That's what brought me to Ethiopia initially. And in 2015, there was an AU Commission of Inquiry in South Sudan that was conducted. And actually it was very good in terms of documenting in the initial days of the conflict in 2013 in South Sudan. The government sort of went throughout various regions in the capital of Juba and was looking for Nuer residents and murdered. The numbers, it's difficult to ascertain, but in the, you know, over 10,000 was often the number cited. And so that was very well documented by the AU. And they were able to conduct a very thorough investigation. They ended up releasing a report that was over 300 pages and it was very excellent in many ways. But then what you saw was that the report wasn't actually released until after the peace process or the peace deal had been signed many months later. And there was many meetings at the AU where they were supposed to release it, and there was debates, and it was blocked, and it wasn't released. And the argument was that if you release these findings now, and the recommendations, which the recommendations were, you know, certain leaders, Salva Kiir, the president of South Sudan, most specifically, are implicated in these abuses, and they're the same people that are meant to sign a peace deal. So there was a lot of reticence in terms of releasing the findings because again, the argument was, well, it's going to disrupt the peace process. But then you have sort of these difficult balance between trying to get the parties to the negotiating table, trying to get them to sign a peace deal. But then in doing that, you're blocking the ability to release findings and then to achieve accountability in the long term. So oftentimes you'll see those two things sort of being balanced. Whereas in the case of Ethiopia, we haven't even gotten to the negotiating table yet. But you probably would see in terms of the Commission of Inquiry and releasing the findings, I mean, we'll see as things unfold. But like if the United States' announcement about potential sanctions, if the two parties don't come to the negotiating table, comes to fruition, or the parties actually do start a mediation process, then you may see the AU become more reluctant to actually release its findings ultimately. So just to sort of summarize, I think the AU investigation is the one that we should be supporting over the UN investigation at this point because of its independence from the Ethiopian government. But we'll see what eventually takes place in terms of releasing its findings in a timely manner.
Thank you, Patrick. It does sound a very complicated process to even understand it, who is doing what and where even and how is quite a very problematic question. Governor Christos, you can also add to what, you can reflect on what Patrick has explained a bit, but coming to your time, the time that you spend on investigating for Tughat, what has your experiences been of gathering evidence, like in terms of trust, the trust that you need to inspire the people that you talk to, the people that who are calling you or contacting you to share their stories, to give testimonies. in terms of trust, what has been your experiences? And like Patrick mentioned, the Ethiopian government is trying, of course, to dominate the process. And in a way, it's also dominating the process of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission by putting people who are loyal to the government or to the leaders of the Ethiopian government. So I'm thinking about how far people will have been willing to come forward and share their experiences or their stories with the joint investigation when there is so much mistrust of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. And when it comes to your work, how accountable are you to the people you speak to? And do they ask you, or what do they ask you to do in order to share their stories?
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. I like to say a few things on the UN investigation or the AU investigation. I think in my opinion, the UN investigation has failed already before it even is released, because one, we've seen that, we have, for example, Mikhail Minassieh, who was involved, who was hired at the beginning by the UN, but really because of the pressure from the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, which is in this case really an extension of the Ethiopian government, he was not able to continue in the work. This demonstrates why the Ethiopian Commission was involved in the investigation. Another thing is it hasn't visited the most important crime scenes. What is an investigation in Bahar Dar about Tigray? And a third point is this investigation should be victim-centered. And as far as I know, there is no Tigrayan institution or a section of society that has accepted this investigation, this joint investigation. Even at Tighat, we have about 6-7 articles from different sections of society, from scholars, from political parties, from individuals, from civil societies, warning the United Nations not to involve the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. So really what this investigation has done is to ignore the voice of the victims, the very victims for which you do investigation. I don't understand, what is the investigation for? If it is not meant, to address the injustice that is committed upon the victims. So for me, it should have been victim-centered. It should have started with listening to the victims, but it started with listening to the perpetrators of the crimes. So on many levels, for me, it has failed. But the EU investigation, I'm not sure if it is even happening. I mean, I've never heard anything about any progress after the initial announcement. So I don't want to say much about that, but given the AU's history and how close it is to the Ethiopian government, if you ask me personally, I don't expect much. Coming to really to the main question you asked me, Eldabeth, that is also related to the investigation by the UN or by the African Union. Trust. For us, it took us quite some time before people can trust us and share their information with us. And after that, we have to talk on many levels. What part of the information should be out and what part of it should not be, and how to make them, untraceable, because they are in a conflict zone. So it really is like about building some confidence, some trust with the victims. So only people who have heard from other people that we are trustworthy are willing to share their information with us. They don't just share information. They don't just send information. So I don't think the UN or the African Union have, given their history, given how they are seen by Tigrayans, by the Tigrayan community outside and inside, it would be very hard for them to have that trust of the victims, so they can tell them, you know, the atrocities, the injustice that have been committed upon them. So I think there they have failed. We ourselves have, many people have refused to share their information with us because they said they don't know us. They don't know us. Even, you know, we have been part of the community. They know us from social media. Many of us, they know us. But even with that, the times are such that, you know, you have to be extra careful with sharing information, especially when the Ethiopian forces, the invading forces were in Tigray. It was a little bit getting better later, but it was very difficult. So really what I am trying to say is we had to win their trust before they share information with us. And some of them share information, but really on giving details, they still are reserved. They keep, you know, this information for themselves. They say later, maybe later when things are better. So it is quite a struggle, you know, to have them trust you and share their information with us. And I don't believe the UN and the African Union had that initial confidence, and their track record was really very difficult to establish that type of trust with the victims. So yeah, it is difficult, and I think these institutions have, I think, to the best of my understanding, don't have that advantage, and I don't think they also work to win that trust.
Thank you. It's a very important point. I think the trust in this whole process, you explained it very well, Governor Christos, that it needs to be the victim-centered process, that they need to feel they are heard, that they need to feel they are they have been seen. So you also, Tigray also mentioned this before, that the objective of investigating crimes is to get to the bottom of the bottom of things, to get truth, to uncover truth. And I think it's on November 1st, 2021, that the final findings of the joint investigation will be published. So whatever the findings will be, how do you think the Tigrayan community will receive these findings, especially amongst those who are the joint investigation is supposed to represent? Tigray, this is for you, the discussion. And do you think the community will be, that they will believe that they have been heard, that they have been seen by the UN and by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission?
Thanks, Elsa. Let me start with by talking about what happened a couple of days ago when the Ethiopian government expelled high-profile UN staffers from Ethiopia. There was a universal opprobrium, universal condemnation of the decision to expel officials who I think still has diplomatic immunity. That was an unprecedented decision, and the international community was kind of in one voice shocked. Although I would dare say some of it is just for virtue signaling purposes. I don't think people truly shocked. If they are, they had seen things which are much worse than expelling people. But I think that must have given people an opportunity to ask a very important question, which is that why did the Ethiopian government not expel anybody from the members of the joint investigative team from the UN? The reason that the Ethiopian government didn't expel anybody was because they were more than happy to play according to the government terms, right? Because we know that the reason that it expelled the UN staffers was because they, in a slight way, refused to totally succumb to the government's demands. And that is very, very telling. The fact that the UN was happy to play according to the rules set by the Ethiopian government means that they weren't really, although maybe they went to Ethiopia in good faith, I don't doubt that part, but even Gabriel Christos mentioned the Tigrayan journalist who was hired as a translator and interpreter, and he described the environment of the investigation, how people were being interviewed, how people were being kind of nudged to say certain things and not others, how the environment wasn't free, and the UN wasn't really in the driving seat. It was the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission who was in charge of everything, right? And that tells you that the kind of result that would be published would be one that would have the blessing of the government. I don't think they will say anything that the government wouldn't like, right? That's if you look into every indicator, that is the kind of result that would be published. And we know that the main story that they want to say. They want to say the Tigrayan forces started the war, and we were dragged into the war. And as in any war, there were some bad apples who committed crimes. And it was by all parties. That's why they needed to go. Gabriel Christos raised a very important point regarding why it did that. The investigative team felt the need to go to Bahardar. They needed to go to kind of on a wild goose chase for crimes in Bahardar and other areas, so that they would say, well, all parties have committed crimes, collateral damages, but that was pretty much that. That is, I think, the main content of the details could vary, but that would be the main content of the report that would be published. We had seen signs of that from how they reported the heinous crimes committed in Aksum and other areas. And the Tigray people know that. The Tigray people know that that would be the content of the report to be published. So there is an absolute rejection as far as the Tigrayans are concerned. I don't think any Tigrayan would accept the result of the investigation, right? But there is still a significant number of people who still hold out the hope that maybe the international community would also be suspicious of the results, that maybe it would be published through, but there would be some suspicion, maybe some reservation on the part of the international community. But if the international community totally bought the results, right? Number one, that would be a huge miscarriage of justice. And it would be a huge insult to the Tigray people, and especially to the people who have been made victims in this war. But I would want to add another point, Elsa, if you give me a minute. I was reading an article written by a Tigrayan scholar about what profile, what kind of caliber should a person who is a mediator possess, right? And he says that person or that entity should be impartial. And without that, everything else becomes very, very problematic. And I think the same skill set should be required of a person who is investigating crimes. There should, at the very least, be some sort of impartiality, and all entities involved in the investigation should have kind of some trust, some level of trust in the person. And the AU, as long as it's working in joint with the Ethiopian government and because the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, I think is an extension of the Ethiopian government. As long as that is the case, I don't think it would have the trust of the Tigrayan people at the very least. And any investigation result that would inevitably water down the suffering of people would be a huge miscarriage of justice, I would say.
Thank you, Tigray. Thank you. So I think we will be wrapping up our discussion. I mean, it's like we have been trying to explain, it's kind of a complex or complicated process to unpack the actors and why, who, and how they are doing this investigation process, given that there is a total communication blackout in Tigray. But I think we have uncovered lots of points here, and in relation to the controversies of surrounding the work of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, and why it's problematic for the UN Human Rights Commission to work with such organization. But before we finish, I would like to give you 1 minute each to give your concluding remarks. Patrick.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I guess my concluding remarks, I would just sort of build off of what Gebre Christos said. I mean, we've really discussed sort of how problematic the UN investigation is, given how it's compromised by like the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission's role. And Gebre Christos raised some good points in terms of the AU and different questions about the extent to which we can trust the AU to carry out such an investigation. But my only question to that would be then, you know, what are we left with then? Because those are the two, the UN and the AU are the two most important multilateral institutions that can conduct these investigations. So as much as I agree with all the criticism, that this isn't a point of disagreement in terms of, you know, whether we will be able to fully trust the investigations. It's just more a question about like the nature of these investigations in general. And if those two bodies, if we have so many questions about their investigations, then, you know, there is no other higher body or other international institution I can think of that can conduct such investigations. So then the questions I would raise would be more about like broader questions about like, you know, whether there are mechanisms in the current international system to conduct these investigations credibly, impartially, independently. And if there aren't, then, you know, what does that say about the current context, and what kind of rethinking of these multilateral institutions needs to be undertaken for credible investigations to take place?
Thank you, Patrick. I think it's quite a very important question or comment, and I assume Gebre Christos will.
Well, I can also just indeed. I think Patrick has raised an important question here. I would just like to say a few things here, and I think that should be my concluding remark. There are two courses that I see here. So I believe so far the Ethiopian government, the Abiy regime, has successfully convinced these international institutions that its position is justified and that it has to be believed. And given the communications blackout and the inaccessibility of the Tigrayan leadership, these institutions have really bought this narrative. So they are compromised from the very start. So one option, I believe, now is that, you know, when change happens on the ground, that a new investigation, something that is not adulterated by the Ethiopian government, could happen, could take place. Well, there are other reasons to do this. One is because the investigation, as the UN chief herself said, it didn't really go as planned, so it's aborted. So maybe there is a chance to restart and totally with a new way, totally independent. That's one option. And the African Union could also maybe, you know, acknowledge the mistakes it did before, the positions it took before, and also really start afresh, seeing the parties to the conflict here as, you know, not as one is better than the other, but just, you know, as conflicting parties, and that its role is to investigate the crimes that have been committed in Tigray. That should be independent. You don't need a narrative to invest. You don't need to really side with one to investigate the injustice the atrocities that are committed on civilians. So these are the two options. The other option is that change comes in Ethiopia, and an Ethiopian-led process. Ethiopia has its own laws and rule, even like, most of the international conventions on human rights are accepted by the Ethiopian constitution as well. They are part of the Ethiopian law. And so a process, like really an Ethiopian-led process, could also be the way forward. But what I am trying to say is, I think what has been done so far is really kind of an insult to me. It just says, to me, the message it sends is, you don't matter. And even the investigation is not for you, but it's just, for us to kind of say, like, we have done something as well. It's not victim-centered. It's not for the victims. That is, I think, clear to me, as far as I am concerned. So on that basis, I kind of see these two options as a way forward. But I think it is also time dependent. So time will tell how this unfolds in the future.
Thank you, Gora Christos. Tahlai, concluding remarks. You could add. Also, you could add on the points Gora Christos and Patrick raised.
Thanks, Elsa. I think I would start by acknowledging Patrick's practical concerns. I think he's being very ideal. He knows how the world in general and how the international community functions, and it's always good to have people who know how the system works. I think maybe in saying that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission shouldn't investigate and the UN shouldn't investigate, maybe I'm being naive and idealist. So it's good to have people who kind of give you the perspective. But I don't think it's unfair to demand that no matter who the investigative team is, the Ethiopian government, through its Trojan horses, like the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, shouldn't be involved. I think that would be the bare minimum demand that anybody should make. As to who should investigate then, I think it should be some entity that, at the very least, again, all the warring parties, and especially the victims, have some modicum of trust. I think that is very important. And I would pretend that the international community, if it exists, is listening to me. And I would say that would be the minimum requirement that any team that investigates should have. It should have the trust, the credibility, and the ability to kind of find out the truth of what happens. And the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission simply doesn't have any of those requirements. But I readily acknowledge and appreciate the concerns, the practical concerns that Patrick is raising. Thank you.
Thank you all. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I believe our viewers will get lots of insights and perspectives from different aspects, how problematic it is, and the challenges surrounding the process of investigation of the crimes committed in Tigray during the war, and how the voice of the Tigrayans has been taken into account in this process. And I enjoyed it, and I hope everyone will enjoy the discussion as I have. Thank you, everyone, for today. This was it. Thank you.